All right, you want to take some questions?
Let's go for it. Yeah.
Okay, very cool. So, Eric asks, what's one thing that people who have not been on a boat in a race like this will never quite understand unless they do it themselves? He writes, I feel like watching you, I intellectually feel what it must be like and live through you, but I'm sure there are 100 layers between that and the real thing.
Hmm. Oh, that's a cool question. um, yeah, I think it's the connection that you end up feeling with the boat and and nature.
Mm,
And it's easy to see them as separate things. Like there's the human, there's this boat, and then there's the waves and the wind and the water and all that. But when you're really in it, um, I would imagine something like surfing is like this. And Eric's a skateboarder, so Eric
mm,
would relate to this in skateboarding, right? There's a point of competency when the skateboard, the human, and the
mm,
concrete are all connected,
mhm,
right? They're not separate things. And I think that's, for me, one of the beautiful things on the boat is when I'm helming or when I'm trimming the sails or when, even when I'm just sitting around and other people are doing those things, the connection that you feel with the boat and then the nature around you and how it's all working together is it's just an experience that you have to really understand it, or to
mm,
or to relate to other types of activities. And I mean, as a skier, that's a feeling you have, when you're really skiing well. There's
mhm.
no separation of human equipment and the snow, right, and the mountain.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that would be the one thing. I think the other thing is just, you know, we are cold, we are wet, we are, not cleaning ourselves, we are not sleeping a lot. Um,
Mm,
and that's the sort of a constant state for weeks. And but you can still operate pretty at a pretty high level
mm,
with all of that being true. Um, so if people haven't done sort of adventure type activities or hikes or climbing or stuff like that, or you did your big walk across England, like if you haven't put yourself into a state of uncomfortableness over a prolonged time, you might not recognize that you're actually far more capable of operating that at a high level than you might have thought you were.
mm,
So that's another thing. Yeah, I mean, with sailing, I think that the other unique thing, I'm trying to think from a non-sailor's perspective. I
mm,
think the thing that I think the way the wind interacts with the boat and the sails, and what makes the boat accelerate or slow down.
mm,
Um, when you start understanding that and can tweak the boat just in tiny little ways and
mhm,
feel the acceleration of the boat happen or feel when it doesn't happen, and you undo what you've just done, like that's a pretty thrilling experience to just feel connected with the wind through the sails in that way and to feel the impact of the little tweaks that you're making, because it's like a, I don't know, 40 or 50 ton sailboat, right?
yeah.
You wouldn't think you would even notice, but you totally notice how little changes make a difference. And that
Wow.
goes back to that sort of feeling connected to the equipment.
Mhm.
You definitely feel all the nuances of how the boat's moving at a different level once you've been on the boat for a while.
Wow. That was just so cool. So, the feeling of I never would have thought. I really thank you, Eric. I appreciate this question because I would never have thought that I could relate it to
Mm-hmm.
anything in my own experience, right? So I had about 10-year-old ski equipment. Last time we talked, actually, I was out in Colorado.
Mhm.
And I my skis were delaminating. So to go really fast on skis that are delaminating, it creates some danger that you don't want to do, basically. And so I got to try some demo skis, and the first pair I tried, um, I was it felt like driving a big sluggish car. I was like, oh,
Mhm.
okay, this is a different feeling. And the second pair that I tried, it was like it was as if I'd strapped on rockets. And just as you say, the smallest, subtlest motion, like once you know how to do it,
Mhm.
you could just go like you could. I felt like I was literally flying it. I have had a lot of fun ski experiences, but this was like a whole different thing because of the updates that have happened in skis technology and that sort of
Mhm.
thing. And
Mhm.
but this interplay of the snow and the fall lines, the things that simply are in the environment, and the way that you can play with them means that you don't really feel like there's any it feels like you're 100% connect, like you are a part of it. And
Mhm.
that sounds like exactly what you're describing. Like,
Yeah. 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 We met, we had a host, Airbnb host in Australia, Fremantle. Um, yeah, he was quite an interesting guy. And when I sat and he asked me, to describe what it's like coming across the ocean, and at the end, he was almost in tears. He's like, at first you were talking about the ocean, and then I just got the sense that like you are the ocean. I was just like,
mm.
I was just like, wow, okay, well, that's exciting. I don't know what that really means, but I but I do know it feels that way when you get to a certain point, and when you're really connected to the boat, and the boat is really performing well, and you
Yeah,
feel, yeah, every little nuance of how you behave is affecting the boat, and how the boat is interacting with the ocean. It's a pretty cool
yeah.
experience. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Like I feel that I understand why someone would have that reflection about you
Mm-hmm.
becoming the ocean, because like you're well, I think a related question, I think, is about something I've been thinking about a lot lately is like um the idea of being sort of present here where we are now, right? Like being comfortable with the idea that we cannot predict the future, that we, like I feel like I've learned how to not be anxious about the future, I guess, is to really be here now and just be comfortable with whatever's happening. And how does that interact with like the choosing of a direction and the moving in a direction?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're two different things, it feels like to me. You're good here, you're on the boat, right, and yet you also have a direction that you're trying to get.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that you do it with so much joy, the way that you've described it is like you basically ride the forces. Like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I've learned a lot about this, I think, on this trip, but I also know that I'd heard bits of this before we started, and one of the great teachers on this was, Anna Debenham, who runs,
Mm,
the Insight Alliance, which is a program out close to me here in, Oregon, that works with, inmates in the criminal, detention system. Um, and I remember asking her like how she goes about, the programming, and how structured it is and all that. And her line was, you have to have a plan, but you need to hold it lightly.
mm,
And, on the boat, that's we're always planning for what the next day or two, will look like based on the forecasted weather, right? And the way I would relate forecasted weather to real life is, there are lots of people who will give you advice, or lots of books you can read on a plan on how to start a business, how to career advice, right? How to do a job interview, blah, 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 right?
mhm,
No shortage of advice on how to do things, or a plan or a forecast on how things may unfold.
Mm.
And then
Predictions, basically.
predictions,
Yeah.
yeah, and they're based on, historical truths. That certainly the weather forecasts are based on historical data plus some current data. Um, advice on careers and starting a business is based on, an assessment of a whole lot of people, and then it's generalized, right?
Hmm.
But if you stay inside the boat in the navigation center and make decisions based on looking at the forecast alone, you will make a complete mess of things.
Mm.
You have to stick your head above the deck and look at what the hell's going on, right? You have to see what the wind is doing. You have to experience what the waves are like. You have to
Yeah.
see what direction the clouds are going and what kinds of clouds they are, and whether the wind strength and the wind direction is accurate as to what the forecast had thought it would be, or if it's different. And then you have to be able to determine what about the forecast is I don't want to say wrong, but is different than what reality
Mm.
is, right? And then you have to then change your plan, right? You have to assess why you're seeing something different than what you had expected to see, and then you tweak or adjust the plan because you're holding that plan as lightly as Anna would have suggested,
Hmm.
right? And then the plan becomes a new plan, right? And it continues to evolve in that way. And the better you are at observing actual reality and assessing why that actual reality is different than what had been forecast to happen, the better you are at those two things, the better you are at executing a plan that will work.
Hmm.
So our decision making is probably an equal balance of let's understand what the forecast says is supposed to happen and have a loosely held plan around that. Let's be super diligent about observing what's going on, measuring, and then let's also spend a lot of time comparing that to the forecast and trying to understand and interpret the difference between reality and the forecast. And that's every day,
Yeah.
right? Every day. It's not sit back and just go with the forecast for a week and see what happens, which, unfortunately, I think a lot of people are afraid to confront the reality of what's happening in their lives because it often will tell them something different than what the forecast
Was
had said,
forecast.
right?
Yes.
And then that creates uncertainty, and people don't
Yeah.
love uncertainty. And yet on the boat, we embrace the uncertainty because we know that Mother Nature is going to do things, and things are going to happen outside of our control. And that's part of what the attraction of sailing is for a lot of us. And so but then it's what do you do with that uncertainty, and how do you take advantage of it and make the most of it?
Mm.
So
Well, and just the final piece of that, right, is taking an action, doing something that once you've consulted the forecast and you've stuck your head above and seen what's actually happening, to try things, to do things, to learn, to sort
yeah,
of it's a sort of repeating cycle.
absolutely it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. You have to be willing, which I suppose is the default, is you have to be willing to actually do something and
Mm.
not just rely on the model or advice or forecast of somebody else who's not even there to see the actual. I mean, even on the boat, there are times when we will get advice from down below, from Mike or from Lottie, based on what they're seeing on the computer. Um, and the feedback to them is like, could you come up with us
Can you come and look?
to see what's going on, because it doesn't feel like consistent with what you're telling us is happening, right? And that's not like negative. It's just there's more
Yeah.
information that you can gather by being actually present in the environment than reading it off a screen. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's a fascinating part of the race, to be honest, and it certainly relates to if I think back to all the coaching that I've done, to so many of the people that I've helped. It was that process of like, let's have a plan, but let's be really diligent about evaluating where we're at on a more reality-based way every day or every couple of days, and then let's work through what those results mean
Mm-hmm.
relative to the original plan. And let's not feel like we have to stick to a hard and fast way of doing something, because reality is that's just a plan that's generalized for based on historical things and doesn't take into account the human nor the fact that we're dealing with a reality that we haven't seen yet. So
Mm.
hard to know what's going to happen until it happens.
And I think taking this back to Eric's question, about things that people have not been on the boat who haven't experienced, I feel like feels like there's a deeper level of, I don't know, learning or appreciation for you that like this kinetic experience can be translated to so much that people do experience or could if they were open to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the things that I've noticed that I'm really good at, which is relating experiences that I'm having that for a lot of people seem very, very hyper specific, like
Hmm.
sailing a boat around the world. I have the ability to relate that to a lot of uh, other things.
Mm.
And yeah, one of my best friends when I was coaching introduced me at a conference once when I was speaking, and his comment was that he'd never met somebody that could connect the dots between two things that most people wouldn't see any connection between, right?
Mm.
And and nobody had ever said it that way, but now I can see how that's true. Like the stories that I come out with after hopping off the boat, or the lessons I'm learning, I find it easy to relate them to a lot of different things. And, I think people seem to appreciate that, and how what I'm experiencing could be very similar to, a skier, a skateboarder, somebody, starting at their career, what have you. Um, because it's all just human beings experiencing life. It's just
Hmm.
like the context is actually kind of irrelevant. It's just a bunch of humans experiencing life. And we've just removed a lot of the the certainties and the structures that would make things seem stable. We don't have any of that. We just have this tiny little boat bobbing around in the ocean. um, yeah, it certainly makes for a great learning environment. And then, I think my natural tendency is to think about how this relates to people that I've known, or experiences that I've had or other people have had around me, and what we can take from that, what we can learn from that.
Mm. Wow. Well said. Thank you, Eric, for a great question too.
Mm-hmm.
Angel asks, what food that you aren't able to access in the moment do you miss the most while out at sea?
Mm-hmm. Well, I had breakfast with Angie here in
Oh,
Seattle, so,
wow,
so that was
very
cool.
cool.
She is my next younger sister. She lives here in
Wow.
Seattle. Um, yeah, food's an interesting topic, because we eat a fairly standard, I wouldn't say bland, but a sort of repetitive menu. I think the thing that I enjoy most in most of the ports we go to is fresh seafood. Um, um, Partially because obviously we're going to port cities everywhere we
Mm,
go, so they tend to have a good supply of that. But it's also something that we don't get on the boat. So I'd say, yeah, seafood. Um, yeah, otherwise, we eat pretty well. We have beef, we have chicken, we have the breakfasts. I'm gluten intolerant, so my diet on the boat sort of removes, the breads and the muffins and the cakes. We do a few gluten-free things from time to time, so that's been nice. But we talk a lot as we're getting close to a port about what everybody's first meal is going to be, and
mm,
mine is typically, yeah, a nice seafood platter somewhere, and vegetables, because we run out of vegetables on the boat very early, fresh
mm,
vegetables.
mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, getting some real food in me and some real some fish is sort of my go-to.
I feel like I read about a horrible tragedy was that you all ran out of maple syrup at some point.
We did, yes, yes, and that has been fixed, thankfully.
Oh,
Now that we're,
good.
yes, you
All
can't
you
buy.
Canadians.
Well, yeah, apparently maple syrup is not a thing in China and Vietnam,
Oh.
so we hadn't considered that in stocking the boat. But there's sort of this absurd belief that from the rest of the world that all Canadians eat is maple syrup as well. So it's kind of hilarious that like I definitely eat more maple syrup on the boat than I've ever eaten at any point in
Like
my
in your
life. Yeah.
normal life. I
So,
remember learning that there actually is, this is like a real thing, I understand, a maple syrup reserve, which has like millions of gallons of maple syrup. And
wow.
I think it's not so much for the pleasure of the Canadians to eat or consume, right, as it is for like selling. So first,
Ah,
that's my understanding. I could be wrong, but
that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Might be
yeah,
a national security thing too,
yeah, you got to get
ward
this.
off, defend ourselves with maple syrup. Yeah.
Yeah. But when I first learned of it, my initial thought was like, how wonderful that all the Canadians can get their maple syrup. I mean, I'm a Canadian too, and we do have
Yeah.
maple syrup in the fridge, but I don't have it too often these days. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Now we're all
Uh,
stocked back up for the rest of the way to England. So
oh, thank heavens,
mhm.
You have some pleasures on the boat, I suppose. Um, Karen, oh, thank you, Angel. That was a great question too. I love these little, they seem seemingly small things that are pretty important. I mean, if you're on a boat and you're running out of vegetables again on leg
Mhm.
6, then you keep running out after it, that's a thing. So, I'm sure it must be really fun to dig into that seafood platter when you get on land.
Oh yeah.
Karen asks, what does it feel like when you are at the halfway mark, meaning in the ocean with no land at all, just the sea, knowing that it's really just you, the crew, the boat, and the ocean, no rescue easily?
Mm. Well, this is a really interesting question given our last race because we had a crew member fall out of his bunk onto the to the ground in the boat and injure his hip quite badly. Um,
Mm. He
Karen's a
wrote about
doctor.
it.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
Karen's a doctor, so she'll appreciate this one. Yeah, he wrote about it, Steve. Yeah. Um, and where that happened, we quickly did an assessment of where we were relative to medical evacuations. We were literally in the middle of nowhere.
Mm.
Um, it was, I think, over 1,000 miles north to Alaska, which would
Mhm.
have also meant going into some nasty conditions and storms potentially. We were, I think, 1,400 miles or so from Hawaii, which, as attractive as it sounds, would have probably eliminated us from this race and potentially the next race because we would have been too far from Seattle to make it to the start of the next race.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
and then we were a couple thousand miles uh, from, if we turned around, back to Japan, and then we were still a couple thousand miles from Seattle. And so the
Wow.
other options are basically looking for some commercial ships that might be somewhere in our area and doing some kind of a transfer to them because they would typically have better, ability to care for somebody, and then they would arrive somewhere faster than we could. But it was a real wake up call for all of us, just on the remoteness um, of parts of the race. For me, I loved I loved that aspect of it. I loved um, not the risk. It didn't feel like a risk of being so far away from humankind or civilization, but just the sense that you could do that in a little sailboat, and that we could be out there. And we saw, we came up right beside a sperm whale somewhere around that middle point of the last race, and this sperm whale was just lying in the ocean, might have been sleeping, all you saw was this little hump that they have on their backs, and it didn't look like that big a whale until you got close to it and you saw how much of it was underwater. And I remember just thinking, like, here's this huge whale in the middle of nowhere,
Wow.
just going about its life, and somehow we've ended up, in the same place as
Wow.
it. Um, yeah, so that's always really cool. And we one night we had some great starry nights during the trip, and we saw the space station go over top
Uh-huh.
one night. We saw Starlink launch their satellites one night.
That seems like a pretty frequent
Yeah,
occurrence when you're
yeah, I
out
think
there.
it's
Yeah.
like the third or fourth time. Business must be good at Starlink these days. Still looks like a bunch of alien invaders, but you kind of, and funny enough, in the northern, must have been maybe the trajectory that they were on. They were quite low. They were quite close to us, and so you got this sense, because the first time we saw them, they were spaced out sort of in what looked like small spacings, but now they were so close to us that the spacings were much larger.
Mm,
But yeah, I mean, it just kind of reminds you, like, what an amazing experience this is to be able to be here in this environment, um, generally safe, generally able to, make our way to where we're trying to go. It's just pretty surreal when you're
mm,
actually there, and in that. I think because of that, the accident and the awareness of how remote we were, it was just even heightened to say, wow, like, it's amazing that we're here. And yeah, it's also concerning if something were to happen.
mm,
It'd be hard to deal with it. But yeah, so there's a lot of ways to experience it, but I think I felt both of those things. I think I felt the concern, but also the awe
mm.
of being able to do something like this, and cross 6,000 miles of ocean in a sailboat. Uh, it's pretty inspiring. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I mean, just the look on your face. I mean, for people listening, there's
Mm.
an odd AWED look of like, wow.
AWED. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
And you're reminding me of when one of my favorite things in England, once I was adjusted, there was an adjustment period, but once that happened, that was looking forward to the day and knowing that it was going to be an amazing day and putting my phone in airplane mode and knowing that like I was just and that we did have a mountain rescue needed to come in a helicopter and rescue somebody who'd broken
Mm-hmm.
their leg or ankle. And so I definitely remember the appreciation of like, wow, things can be serious up here and also just like I think about a lot our very beloved colleague Michele Schiavino. Um, he and I have talked a little bit about the expression "in bocca al lupo," which means into the mouth of the wolf, and which is how Italians wish each other good luck.
Mm.
And like there is this, we are now doing this, hell yeah, kind of feeling
Mm.
that I think is really there's a real good excitement to it.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to look around and be in the middle of nowhere and to know that like you're really here. That's a,
Yeah,
that's a special feeling, huh?
it is. It is. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Woo. Ooh, I feel that. Karen also asks, how do you not vomit with some of these waves? I feel like the boat can really pitch.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, well, if people have seen some of the videos that have come out, well, I'll call that genetics and some good nurturing as a child, being put on a boat, I think from time I was an infant,
Mhm,
that I have no issues with seasickness whatsoever. So I count myself very fortunate, because there's a lot of people on the boat that do and struggle with it for usually 3 or 4 days when we're out at sea. Sometimes it's reoccurring when the weather gets bad, but usually you get acclimatized, your body does, and then you're okay.
mm,
Um, there's days when if you're down below and you're cooking and it's really rough, the smell of the food or the smell of, cleaning supplies and stuff like that can trigger some people. But you just kind of put your head above, and get some fresh air, and usually you're all right. So I don't know, there are medicines and there's patches and different things that people do to try to prevent the onset of seasickness. I'm not sure how well they actually work, but for most people, it's just, either spending enough time on the water that your body gets used to it, or just going through it and waiting to come out the other side.
Mm, mm,
So yeah, we've had several crew members who, for the first 3 or 4 days of a leg, we didn't see them very much, and
mm.
lots of throwing up and lots of that going on. And then all of a sudden, you see some life coming back into them, and then they're fine for the rest of the trip.
I didn't know that that was a thing. You've mentioned that before, that like, you know, people get sick for the first couple days and then,
Hmm.
you know, I had sort of thought that like once you were seasick, you were always seasick. So
Yeah,
it's
no,
kind of heartening to know that you can grow through that, you
yeah,
know.
yeah. No, it's usually 3 or 4 days, sometimes even just 2 days, and then the body figures out and gets its equilibrium reset, and people seem to be fine.
Cool.
Hmm.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Karen, for those. That's amazing. Um, yeah, so there's a couple things that I was curious about. Um, well, I'm gonna ask this one first. Do you ever just crave a walk?
A walk, as in like with my feet,
Yeah, like
not not
I was
a cooking walk. Yeah.
I was on a walk the other day and I was like, you have got 70 feet from one end to the other. There's like no, you get a lot of exercise, I think, right? But like, do you ever, I don't know, do you ever just crave a walk?
An interesting question. I always laugh because these my smartwatch, my sort of Garmin fitness watch. I think I had it set for 12,000 steps a day was my goal before starting the race. In the sort of fitness lead up phase. Um, and it would buzz when I was got to 12,000, and it would
Hmm.
buzz when I got to 20,000 or whatever. But it seems to have sort of some AI built into it where it resets my goals based on how I'm actually doing.
Oh.
And now it celebrates when I get to 1,500 steps in a day. Um, so it's sort of demoralizing when I look down and go, oh,
Hooray!
1,500 steps. But um, yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this, privately before, but a big part of my self-care, it has been walking and
Hmm.
morning walks, and often by the water. Certainly during COVID, and well, even before that, it's a good time for me to reflect. It's sort of meditative experience for me. So I definitely miss, having that as sort of a consistent part of my day. Um, but there are long stretches on the boat where we're kind of just going about our sailing, and there isn't a lot to do. And so there's still some opportunities to get a little bit of that on the boat. But for sure, one of the things I do um, at all the ports is to find, walking trail close to the water, and go off on my own and find a local coffee shop, and take my time enjoying the places that we get to go. So I'd say yes, for sure. Like I miss it, but it's also something that I'm trying to replicate in different ways on the boats, because it's really more of a meditation than it is a physical fitness thing for me. The
Mm,
whole experience of walking and that time alone is really, really positive for me.
mm, mm. So you found ways to get that, even if looks a little different.
Trying to on the boat, yeah. And then certainly seeking it out, when we're back on land. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, very cool.